My name is Amber, and this is Life After TV Productions. I'm here with Greg Perry. He is a
horological conservator, a furniture maker for many years, and the economy turned down around 2000. And instead of copying the great pieces of the high point in American cabinet making, furniture making in Philadelphia, I chose to get the training that would enable and embody me to do the restoration and conservation of the original pieces that I've been copying for many years. So I reached out, and there was no training, no practical training here. There was a little bit of training in Williamsburg, but the apprenticeships are difficult to get, maybe one or two every 5, 6, 7 years, but it didn't encompass the scientific training also. So nevertheless, I went to Paris, and at times the cultural aspect of art looms much heavier than what I actually learned or experienced in the schooling there, the training for conservation. First, it started for an entire year after my master's degree from the Louvre Museum. The training, I created a training system for a year, going to 5 different studios a day. I was going to a gilding, a tortoise specialist, because in France a lot of the furniture was made out of tortoise in the 17th and 18th century, a French polishing specialist, a gilding specialist, and a marquetry specialist. And in Paris they're rated, or in France they're rated by the government. So you probably have only 5 or 6 studios that accept students, and I was always choosing one of the top 2 or second or third ranked studios in the country. So I would do this 6 days a week, and I'd be at each studio approximately an hour and a half a day, and just within a very small confines of 2 or 3 city blocks. In the 18th century, the 11th arrondissement in Paris would have encompassed about 32 blocks and literally tens of thousands of artists. So it's been condensed to a very small area. And that was only part of my training. So that was a year after the Louvre. After that, I went on an independent training. I went to Venice for 6 months. Here I'm a certified French gilder. I wanted to see how the Italians do it. The ground, the clays are very different in Italy. Beyond that, I've done apprenticeships in Budapest and Florence, Prague, Luxembourg. And at the end of 5 years, I ended up in England, the Midlands. I went to the British Horological Institute for horological conservation of clocks and watches. So it is the ultimate horological training in the world.
So you finish your training in Europe and you come back to America. Where do you start? What do you do?
Very, very difficult, because when you leave a going business and known business for 5 years, and it was actually going for about 18 years, everyone thought you jumped off the end of the earth. You have to reconnect with people, find ways to remarket yourself, which is not easy. I was living in the Allentown, PA area. I have had affiliations with the National Watch and Clock Museum for about 16 years. I teach courses there. I do some of their conservation on a limited basis, usually 1 day a week. And I am presently writing, I'll be the only horological conservator in the country, I'm writing their horological course. So how do you appraise evaluations of clocks? It doesn't have a lot to do with the arts of what I'm doing, but yet I have to have the eye to understand what I'm looking at before I can put a valuation on it. Okay.
So what differentiates your specialty and your training from, let's just say, someone here who simply studied the clock aspect?
Just the clock aspect? Unfortunately, we have people here in the county, or the Tri-County area, that say put a shingle out that they do clock repair restoration. They're untrained, ill-trained, and that's part of the difficulty we have at the National Watch and Clock Museum, because they're members, generally speaking, but they're out there actually bastardizing and destroying historical history because they have not been trained. And I would say, horologically speaking, when I receive a very high-end clock or watch, 85% of my time is undoing 80 to 150 years of bad repairs on these objects. And then I can start putting the object back to as it was new. So that is the difference. But as we look through time, through 2,000 years, people have done this. Osmotically, they've watched somebody for a period of time and they put a shingle out and they say, I can do that, I'll call myself for this and that. Through the 80s, it was people were calling themselves preservationists of furniture with no training. And through the 90s, the catchword was conservationist. Again, no training. So I've kind of changed that. And it's a bit difficult to come back to the States after you've been in Europe. Training, they're very high-grade principles. The government monitors the studios you're training in. There's not an iota of anything we're talking about here in the States, unfortunately. I mean, here in the States, they're cutting all of the funding for the arts. And over there, they actually have art police that go randomly into studios, and they want to know if your ochre color, number 19, is the same as it was 5 months ago or 5 years ago. So they're doing on-site testing. And if it's not, they'll shut you down, literally shut you down. So what we don't have, horologically speaking, here in the States is we don't have standards, and that's a problem. So I've written a course of ethics with the museum, trying to enforce. It's a totally different thing. Because as you know, museums today, everyone from Williamsburg to Winterthur to the Clock Museum, they want members. So they want you to pay your $25 or $50. So if we have, suppose, a clock person in the county that's doing something very bad to an 80-year-old Mrs. Jones, I volunteer to call him and try and say, give her money back or make it right. And this is very difficult from a so-called colleague is calling another colleague. So it makes for some very tenuous situations. But that's very different from what we're talking about, the Beaux Arts here. But I'm very involved. My base is very broad.
Now, when people hear about clocks, they often think of like the grandfather clock, but that also relates very well out into the communities. You had a project you were working on in Salem in regards to a clock there?
Well, that's just starting, though. So it's in our infancy. We just created a video, Let Freedom Ring, a few weeks ago, and you get to the point where conservation, my studio sees objects actually come in from all over the world. Right now, in Alloway, in this little studio on the lake, there's a few objects that have come in from Italy and from France. But then you start looking at your own community after the last 30 or so years, and you see quite the degradation. You see homes that are boarded up, historic homes, and that bothers me severely because I'm a saver of history. That is my mantra, and I'm not greed-driven. And architecture is the most fragile of all the arts. It's exposed to all the elements, to pollution, to degradation by human beings in particular. And when I see places like historic houses, 18th century in our county, that are boarded up and falling in, it's signaling there's big problems, there's social problems, there's political problems in the county. And I'm going to try and address them by using the Let Freedom Ring restoration of John Fenwick's Salem City Clock, which has been silent for many years. So the restoration of that is just kind of my own way of trying to jumpstart and help the county get moving again. And you know, it takes one, it takes two, and then you get a small movement together of preservation-minded people. So the catchword now, not so much a catchword, but it's actually a word through education, is preservation. So let us begin with the preservation movement in our county, so that we have things to show our children and our grandchildren, and they're not deteriorating before our eyes. Let's show our children the importance of historical objects that we grew up with, that our parents grew up with.
Now, you mentioned the Beaux Arts. For those who may not know what that is, could you give like a quick overview of what the Beaux Arts are and what makes that a little bit different?
Well, my training was in the Beaux Arts, and essentially it's only taught in Europe. And these type of arts have been taught for the last 2,500, 3,000 years. And again, back to gilding and marquetry and the type of sculpting they're doing there. Yes, so, you know, it's not sculpting a horse head or something like that. These are sculpting classical figures. I mean, even if you went to the casino, rode by a casino in Atlantic City, you would see one casino, classic Greek structures out there. And that shows the importance of art, whether the people that go in the casino probably never look at those structures that way. But little do they realize that the art is all around us. Serious art, remnants of Doric and Ionic columns in your house. But unfortunately, what's happened over the last 200 years, they get extraordinarily watered down. So Home Depot's columns are kind of an example of a Doric column, but not really. So I want to be out there and educating the public of what the originals actually look like. But back to your question, the Beaux Arts are the basic core of arts. Again, gilding, marquetry, sculpting. And these arts have training programs of 7 to 10 years. It's very serious. Unfortunately, when I come back to the States, I see people that are dabbling in sculpting and other offshoots or sidelines of the Beaux Arts, but they're not trained. So to me, an artist, it's an artist in the Beaux Arts has received several in-depth years of training, actual training. Yes. Questions?
How are we doing?
I don't know. Is there questions that you wanted to ask or anything?
So where is your studio located out of?
Well, right now I have 2 studios. I have the studio in Alloway, which is on the lake, and it comprises a full horological conservation studio. It must be kept almost as a clean room, so for clocks and watches, obviously. So I deal with anything from the mid-16th century to possibly the 1970s for clocks and watches. On the same property, I have a wood studio, wood conservation studio, and basically utilizing hand tools, scientific practices and procedures on high-end pieces of furniture, high-end French, English, and American pieces, trying to save them from degradation and oblivion. And I have clients send me these objects in from basically east of the Mississippi, from Maine to Florida. So, in Woodstown, a year ago, I purchased one of the oldest houses in Salem County, the Samuel Shivers house. And in that house, I have my private clock collection, it is a clock shop. The clocks are for sale. And there's approximately 150 grandfather clocks and a series of very important wall clocks there. There, in the back, I have a very specific studio. And in Arts in Bloom, what we're doing is, because our mantra or what we're called,
Welcome to my world.
okay.
You can edit, it's fine.
No
Okay.
problem.
So Arts in Bloom, this year the theme is Through the Looking Glass. So I think in some of our meetings in the Arts in Bloom, we hash this out. Some people are doing mosaic glass in Woodstown. There's an artist, very good artist. And, but what we fail to really talk about is where my studio is on the lake, and where a couple of the other studios are, is that it's actually where glass making in America started. It's where Caspar Wistar came from Germany and brought about 20 glass blowers. So the first glass making in the colonies happened in Alloway, on Alloway Lake, in about a 4 or 5 acre radius. Wistar brought a boat up the Delaware River, and at that time you could come all the way up out to Alloway, Alloway's town. He gets out, he sees a couple great natural resources, oak trees, tons of oak trees, great for firing, building kilns. He sees a clay base. He can build his bricks to make his kilns out of the clay. And lastly, throughout the forest, there's sand, very fine sand for glass making, some of the finest he's seen since he was in Germany. So he sets up shop, he buys some land, and actually from my studio, this is only about a half mile away, but this is just coincidental. But again, I'm trying to get back to the premise here that through the looking glass, this is what it means to me. Or when I'm working in my studio, Wistar went on to be the first manufacturer of plate or flat glass that you'd find in homes. So many of the homes in Woodstown and Salem have their flat panes of glass made by Wistar. And just to add, Benjamin Franklin made 2 trips into Alloway's town in the 18th century because he was a scientist. He needed specific scientific glass apparatus made. So isn't it crazily coincidental that Salem Community College had a little glass program, I don't know, since the 60s or 70s, of glass blowing, ornamental. And then in the last couple of years, they set up a whole glass teaching facility in Alloway. How crazy is that? Coincidental that Wistar started this back in the early 1720s, 1730s. So it still lives on. So they would use the lake that my studio sits on to actually ship the items out to the Delaware River and up to Philadelphia or over to Old Newcastle, the glass products they made. But back to that. So for Arts in Bloom, what I am doing in Woodstown is I'm reproducing looking glasses. So essentially a looking glass is a mirror from the 18th century. That's what it's called. And it's basically rectangular mirrors of different sizes with cutout fretwork. So my studio in the house, in the Samuel Shivers house, will be producing these mirrors or looking glasses in the back. Whose have I chosen? I've chosen ones made by George Hollingshead. He was the only 18th century clockmaker, and he lived in Woodstown. So very, very important. So Hollingshead clocks, grandfather clocks, bring rather big numbers at times, sometimes 15, 18,000 each. Hollingshead only made a couple hundred clocks, but he also made these looking glasses or mirrors in his shop. So I've come to collect actually 9 of these, and I will be reproducing them on the day of Arts in Bloom, Saturday and Sunday. And there'll also be some finished ones to purchase if you like, but I'll be showing the visitors how these are produced.
My name is Amber. We're here with Life After Television Production. I was here with Greg Perry discussing Arts in Bloom. If somebody wanted to reach out to you, what is the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, I think for that Arts in Bloom weekend, May 20th and 21st, to the Old Red House, which is Site 22 in Woodstown. Again, we're going to be making looking glasses from the George Hollingshead to match our theme with Through the Looking Glass. And in the same token, you're going to be able to get to look at one of the greatest clock collections in the tri-state area, over 500 clocks in one of the most historic houses in all of South Jersey, the Samuel Shivers House, dated 1669. So come on out, and I'll show you my techniques of putting the mirrors together, and it should be a great day.
Thank you so much for being here. I look very forward to Arts in Bloom.
Thank you, Amber.
Thank you.
Looking forward to this again.